All right, and it is the top of the hour, so Tara, we're ready to go when you are.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today at CITL's monthly webinar. I'm Tara Corshane. I'm the Chief Research and Development Officer at CATS, and I'll be facilitating today's panel discussion. And I have three panelists with me today. The title for our webinar today is Control Escape. What's the technology start menu for special educators? We're going to be talking to three experts in the field about what their perspective is on what special educators should know as they enter the classroom. And the three presenters are Dr. Jackie Kelleher, Annie Lamberto, and Maggie Pickett. Dr. Kelleher is the State Education Director for the Vermont Agency of Education, where she and her team are responsible for ensuring that IDEA and state laws concerning over 15,000 identified students with disabilities. She's been a teacher, administrator, consultant, professor, and advocate since 1998. Dr. Kelleher raised 4 children with disabilities, including children who experienced autism, seizure disorder, ADHD, and dyslexia. She has presented to parent and family organizations numerous times and has hosted countless sessions presenting with families on understanding the family perspective of raising children with disabilities to schools, designated agencies, and pre-service teachers. Maggie Pickett is a senior TA or technical assistant specialist at CAST, currently working on the Center on Inclusive Technology and Education Systems, CITES, and the National Center on Accessible Educational Materials. She's worked with teachers, students, administrators, paraprofessionals, families, and community partners to build a common understanding of how creating engaging and accessible learning for all is possible. Maggie is an ISTE community leader, an assistive technology specialist, a certified speech language pathologist, mother, wife, and budding gardener. And last, I want to introduce Annie Lamberto, who is a Special Populations Program Coordinator at the Washington Education Agency. She has previously served as a Director of Special Services and is a National Board Teacher Certification as has National Board Teacher Certification as an Exceptional Needs Specialist. In her current role, she leads the Washington Education Agency Special Education Support Center and Inclusionary Practices Project. She supports educators through professional development, technical assistance, and guidance to serve students with disabilities. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And I am ready to get started with our first question. So the first question's for you, Jackie. When a new special educator prepares to enter the classroom, what should they know about what type of technology they will likely become familiar with or utilize, and how should they use that could they use that technology to communicate with various partners?
Oh, thanks, Tara. And hi, everybody. Great to meet you. Great to have this conversation. As we're preparing our new special educators, it's really just important to know the reality of what's happening in the district. So our new educators aren't going in like fully surprised, or also not going in going, man, I learned all this great technology. Where is it now that I'm in the district? Where did, I was so excited. There's nothing here. So yeah, to answer this question first, I mean, how are our new teachers going to be utilizing technology? It's certainly not an exhaustive list, but we need to reflect on how we're currently embedding, the awareness and, if not the training within the coursework that we're providing these educators. So certainly things like case management and managing documentation type software, things like Easy IEP or K-12 America or PowerSchool or GoalView or even a state system. Some of it is made by the district. It's about as varied state by state, community to community, but with how case management and certainly like the IEP the individualized education programs are being managed, but, being prepared to ask those questions like right away, as soon as you start you begin your journey with your district is, getting the training you need. But, being exposed and getting familiar with how those systems work before going into the field can kind of take the shock out of exploring it for the first time on your own. Also, districts nowadays, parent access to documents is really important. The type of platform that we have of keeping the students' files available using technology is something that, and also like the aspects of confidentiality of what you place in there and what you share and disseminate. That's important to know. Our teachers need to be able to use technology to do progress monitoring and data collection and visual displays of data, because now more than ever, being able to interpret the information and share it with multiple partners, from parents to general education, is absolutely critical. Remote learning platforms that the districts are using, whether that's in school or for many of our students who are taking virtual classes, not within the district or within the district through online, teachers are going to have to know either like, how do I design for that platform, or how do I support the student who is experiencing a gen ed class online, and I'm there to either support or to provide the specially designed instruction that goes with it. Certainly assistive technology, we're going to talk a bit in a few minutes about, what to use and how to use it. Things like functional behavior assessments and being able to collect data using technology to develop your behavior intervention plan is something to point out. iPad and apps and Chromebooks, what's available within that district. Being able to, recommend accommodations and modifications to not only the team, but to work with general educators in incorporating those tools where students, need to add the text, or for how the teacher, modifies and accommodates using existing technology in that classroom. So that's another just consideration is how to do that. Certainly software like Read 180, communication software, voice recognition software, learning how to make documents accessible, graphic programs for things like visual support, cards, cue cards, behavior cards, the sundry of assistive technology, but being able to introduce things that are out there like screen readers and alternative keyboards and handheld GPS units. And then, a couple more things about as a teacher, as a special educator that, I didn't know until I got into practice was also, surveys that are conducted by state departments like mine, being able to report using a platform to talk about alternate assessment and, which students are eligible and completing learner characteristics inventories. And then, assessment tools for evaluations are, everything from your observations and rating scales and checklists, are now, technology is the way to be able to collect your data and use it as part of, the federally required process for locate, identify, and evaluate. Super key. Digital portfolios, on and on and on we can go. I mean, not an exhaustive list as I said, but as much as we can do to get them exposed and to ask questions, and also have that on their minds as they go into deciding where they want to be employed. That's just going to prepare them to make good decisions and to be thinking creatively, and also to be advocating for themselves to get the professional development they need to be able to utilize those tools. The other part of that question, of course, is like, how we use technology for effective communication. And effective communication and collaboration for our special educators, like the number and nature of interactions they're having with folks is so critical. The IEP team, everybody involved, to be true partners and true collaborators, the technology is key. Parents, students, administrators, mentors, general educators, the IEP as a whole. I mean, that's, you know, just to name a few of the folks that they're going to be communicating with, and that's through email or Google Classroom, other apps like mobile communication apps that are available, texting. So you know, this is a huge solution, and just some of the, you know, positive aspects is that it allows us to be interactive. It allows us to be timely. The data are clear that it increases parent involvement and collaboration. It can be the solution of effective collaboration between gen ed and special ed. Convenience. Translation features on devices is an amazing game changer for working with diverse families, but also it's important to remind them of the drawbacks that are there too as part of your communication. Is that, you know, it opens our eyes to inequities and you know, access to particular technologies, the use of the comfort level. English language parents, talking to your special ed teachers about boundaries. You know, that's, you know, are we covering that, you know, boundaries, you know, the number and nature of your interactions with families, and the tone that you set. And sometimes in our haste and our quickness with convenience, the tone itself can certainly, you know, really send a parent in particular into not a great space because of the interpretation. And then unclear expectations of using the technology, and then saturation. We run the risk of quantity versus quality of all the information that goes out. So those are, thank you for indulging me on a few thoughts, but those are all the things that I wish I knew when I was preparing special educators, and I didn't do enough. Now that I, you know, again, I'm out in the field after several years, but working with all districts in Vermont, it's a good reminder of what's out there and how to have our teachers prepared for anything.
You know, Jackie, as you were talking, my brain was going to technology integration models and how all of what you're saying is fitting into models that teacher prep programs or even educator prep programs, thinking about direct service providers, could be teaching these, for example, ISTE standards, really provide educators with ways that technology can support their work, not necessarily, as you said, the plethora of tools, because the tools are always going to be changing. But it's the how and it's the why we're using technology. And I think you hit the nail on the head. And there are a million technology integration models. There are different standard sets, but starting there and really starting with a bucket to put all of these things in, so that teachers, like you said, Jackie, when they get into a place of employment, when they get into a building or a school, virtual setting, whatever it might be, they know the questions to ask because they have the buckets and they have a set of standards to kind of work from. Then they can get up and running with whatever set of tools the district has chosen.
Right. If I can just add one more point, and as a reminder to everybody listening, is that teacher training for all aspects can and should be written into the IEP. You know, that's under frequency, duration of support. There's there's a section for like teachers and school staff, like anybody who needs the training. We'll talk about that more with assistive technology in general, but any of these things that we just talked about. And then the second piece is that parent training and counseling is a related service. It's one of the most underutilized requirements under the IDEA. So parents can get the training that they need to be effective collaborators and IEP partners, but that technology is another example, not just AT, but all those other aspects. The parents can get the training to write it into the IEP. It's allowable cost under IDEA. Off my soapbox.
Thanks, Jackie. Annie, did you have anything you want to add?
I concur. And there's a lot that Jackie mentioned that I think leads right into the next question. So
Perfect.
I figured I'd wait.
And the next question goes to you to start us off. One of the biggest challenges with new special educators that they face is working with all of the individuals included on the special education team, the para professionals, SLPs, speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists. How can special educators be prepared to supervise and manage their teams? And how can technology help to support that?
So I will say that I do think this is what I hear most frequently, right, from brand new special education teachers that have entered the field, that they did not really receive preparation for, managing and collaborating with adult staff, right, their colleagues. Thinking about what Jackie was talking about and Maggie talking about the buckets, I like to really recognize that we've got to build the foundations. And so for me, I recommend that new special education teachers really need to kind of address and reflect on what I call the base loads of truth, right? Like, what are the foundational beliefs that are going to determine how they operate and how they make decisions in the classroom? And so it's a little bit more global, but starting there and recognizing, so one of my foundational beliefs is that students come first and that we are student and family centered. And so then looking at, okay, well, then how am I creating those buckets? Well, then I can recognize that I need to build relationships. I need to make time to connect. I need to focus on communication, collaboration. I need to approach as a learner with curiosity, right? And then from there, there's a recognition of we've got to build systems and structures and those procedures in order to do that. So layering on those pieces. I think with paraeducators specifically, we really need to recognize, communicate, identify strengths, interests, include paraeducators in that decision-making process when it's appropriate. Take time, to really value what our paraeducators and our colleagues bring to the classroom, and recognize those things. And so that's kind of that first part, is building your systems, right? And Jackie talked about there's progress monitoring, right? There's all these other pieces that we've got to do. And so you're building kind of that system, those systems. And then I kind of think of, okay, so now where does your technology, and both Maggie and Jackie said, you're going to have a variety of tools. You really may not know what the district tools are, right? But if you've built your systems, you're going to need a system to communicate, right? And collaborate. So what is that? I know when I was a classroom teacher, I was a special ed teacher in a high school, and I ultimately, one of my favorite things about technology is that I don't have to be the expert. And I can empower students to be the expert. And so in my communication system, one simple example was I actually had my students schedule their IP meetings. We used Google, we were a Google district, right? So every student had Gmail and we had, right? And so we shared calendars and had that. And so they scheduled their IEP meetings and made sure that the OT and the SLP, right? All of the parties were there, really empowering them, right? Scheduled with their parents. They did that process. We know we need a data progress monitoring system. And I will tell you, I think it easily, for my own personal experience, took me about 5 years to get my data system really working, right? But recognizing that we need that, and then adding those layers of technology, empowering students to self-assess, right? Involve them, and often they are going to know some of this new tech. As things change, they know it better than we do, right? So really helping collaborate with students in order to include all of the information and really giving them those pieces. I think about schedules, right? There's the master schedule in a building, right? Then there's your, student schedules, then there's your staff schedules, then your, your own schedules, and you're trying to figure all of that out. And the other thing that Jackie mentioned that I think is critical here is the collaborative tools really can be in real time. All of these systems can be shared, we can interact with each other, and it can happen in real time and quickly. And then the other system I think about is organizing information. And Jackie talked about some of you might have a specific IEP tool or, progress monitoring tool, and being able to organize the inundation of information that comes in. So those were just my thoughts. Jackie, Maggie?
Yeah, Annie, as you were talking, my brain went to that managing paraprofessionals. That in my career has always been one of those things that special educators, some of my colleagues would be managing close to 10 paraprofessionals, let alone the 15 to 20 students with really complex learning needs on their rosters. And so when they said, I didn't go to school. I never had a class in managing people and managing calendars. And so I think that that's a really critical point, using these technology. And I love how you laid it out. You get your systems in place, and then you start to figure out what's the technology that can help establish those systems. You can almost automate them, right? And make it just become part of the process. So it's just technology helps us automate, but it also helps us delegate. So it helps us say to those paraprofessionals, hey, at this time of the day, I'm going to need you to capture these pieces of data. You're really good at data. This is your thing. These 2 kids, this is your moment. And so, hey, that's done. Check. So absolutely. The other thing that I think we can't, when we're starting to pick and choose tools, to be cautionary about, and this goes back to kind of technology infrastructure, is that when we're coaching and talking to our new educators, ensuring that we're suggesting and promoting them use the tools that their IT folks have chosen, that their chief technology folks have chosen. There's a reason they've been chosen, and most likely it has a lot to do with student privacy and data security. And so I think that's a big component. There are a lot of tools out there, but there are certain structures in place for the tools that we've chosen within our district. So when we get to that point, we're using those tools that are in district, we're rocking and rolling. The other thing we have to thinking about managing staff and paraprofessionals in particular, oftentimes our special educators move not only into a manager, but also a trainer. I don't know many districts who provide technology training to paraprofessionals on a regular basis. And so special educators move into a role of trainer or coach. Who might have a technology coach come in or an AT specialist come in and provide some training. But that special educator, then once those folks leave the room, they move into that coaching, that support mechanism, right? So that's another hat that they're wearing within that management hat that maybe it could be helpful to think about when thinking about supporting teachers in their career early on. So those are, as you were talking, Annie, those couple of things just kind of came to mind.
And Maggie, just to add a small note, talking about the tools that I teach has chosen, it is also, I think, to add a piece is to know what is the process if you as a teacher think that you need a tool that is not already in existence, right? Like, so just understanding what's your district process, who do you contact, right? How does that work?
Particularly when it's a student need. And I think we'll probably get into more of that with the assistive technology part later, but absolutely, great point.
That's great. Thanks so much. Jackie, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, agree with what everybody is talking about. I just wanted to also make note that when we are working with families, when we are working with paras and others, it's important for our teachers to have the confidence to be able to ask folks how they want to be communicated with as well, particularly families. It's important to know that that first. And then I also wanted to add too that for all of us who are, working with our pre-service educators, our new educators with technology, I can tell you from a state perspective that, one of the major reasons that people are leaving the field or are thinking about leaving the field, comes down to compliance and paperwork and a lack of collaboration with general education. Paraprofessionals came up as well in the data that we collected summer 2021 that not being prepared to be in that role, and what do I do about conflicts in personality, and I guess what I'm trying to say is that technology is part of the solution of how we can be looking at during this our ongoing critical shortage area nationwide, that technology is key, the wise use of technology. So not just I can't believe I didn't even like really highlight, technology for instructional pedagogy, of course, and specially designed instruction. Yes, that's why I signed up to teach. But those other aspects are what are really driving people from the field. And I just see tech at the solution of so many of those areas of concern.
Great, thank you. That is so important, Jackie. So Maggie, I'm hoping you can start us off with this next question. How can special educators be prepared to make IEPs accessible for culturally and linguistically diverse families?
I love this question. So I'm going to start with my accessibility hat on, and then maybe move into more culturally relevant kind of thought processes. I think first of all, if we're making anything accessible, we can use the acronym POUR. Perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. It's an acronym that actually comes from the World Wide Web Consortium. It's the web content accessibility guidelines. That's a really technical set of standards, but they use this acronym POUR to help us understand how to create anything accessible. And so P stands for perceivable, the O stands for operable, and then understandable. That's where this either culturally or linguistically diverse audience typically needs some support, creating content that's understandable. So if we're sending out notifications or scheduling notices to an IEP team, making sure that the parents receive that in a format that meets their needs, in a language that meets their needs. Technology has a lot of great translation services that are free. It's AI, artificial intelligence, that pulls from the web and creates these really nice, not perfect ever, but really nice translations of whatever communication you're sending out. There are also AI apps that as you're communicating with a family face-to-face, if you have a communication breakdown, there are apps that will translate what they're hearing into what you're hearing into what they're saying in an English version. Microsoft Translate, I think anyway, it's got a really nice app. These are all really new technologies, but creating things that are understandable. And then, of course, getting into things that are culturally relevant and making sure, for example, if a culture really believes students should act one way versus we're thinking students should act another way. It's just doing a little bit of background and having a little understanding about what cultures your students are bringing with them and what cultures they're living in their home versus at school, what they're getting access to. I know that the other two folks really probably have some better thoughts and words in that area than I do. So I'll open it up to them. But if we're creating accessible, thinking about it from that POUR acronym, really focusing on that understandable and plain language too, keeping everything as short and as simple as we can when we're talking to families, and using plain language for any family is really essential.
Thanks, Maggie. That I would add, as you were talking, just a couple of things that I was thinking, seek out collaboration and organizations. In Washington State, we have an organization that's really dedicated to supporting families of students with disabilities that are not English speakers. It's a multicultural center. And so as a district, you would want to connect with that that organization to really support some of this, because it's like you said, it's the understanding piece, but then there's this whole understanding the systems and the connections and all of those pieces. So I think, seek out support in these areas. The cultural competencies around getting to know your students and families, right? That you talked about. Translating a document to me isn't enough, right? We really need to look at, and then, when you talked about, I'm gonna put my accessibility hat on. One of the things that I immediately think about is I feel like when we talk about accessibility and cultural competencies, diversity, equity, inclusion, we do not need to be waiting for people to tell us what they need anymore, right? I feel like we wear that hat, and we should be, and as a special educator, we can be advocates saying, are the things that we're doing across our schools, across our buildings, are we making sure that we are creating ways for parents, families, everybody to be included in those processes? So yeah.
Thanks. I'll add too is that, you know, as our new educators, you know, are just coming fresh off their special ed in the law course, I'm sure that they have all taken, you know, just some, you know, what are some of the legal obligations under IDEA and, you know, requirements of the IDEA for school age children ages 3 through 21, you know, identify, locate, and evaluate children with disabilities. This includes children who are experiencing homelessness or are wards of the state, highly mobile, migrant children, English language learners, and more. And, you know, the considerations related to disability with respect to what we're talking about right now, culturally, you know, responsive and relevant documents and assessments, evaluations under IDA and the assessments involved must be conducted in the child's native language. Assessments and other evaluation materials must be selected and administered so as to not be discriminatory on a racial or cultural basis. And a child must not be found eligible under IDA if the, you know, determinant factor is limited English proficiency. However, you can't deny a child special education services due to their also receiving services as an English language learner. Again, we could talk for hours on each of those topics, but I'll just wrap up by saying that essentially under Title VI, all vital documents, including the student's IEP, must be accessible to parents with limited English proficiency. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all vital documents must be translated for every language in the district. For example, a timely and complete oral interpretation or translated summary of a vital document might suffice in some circumstances, you know, something our educators are going to be asked to weigh in on and talk about, you know, under the law and perhaps support in some ways. So a district must, however, be prepared to provide timely and complete translated IEPs to provide meaningful access to the IEP and the parental rights, of course, attached to it, you know, because a parent needs meaningful access to the IEP, not just during the IEP meeting, but also across school years to monitor the child's progress and ensure IEP services are being provided. So just adding to that conversation that it is the law, and this is also where we can use the law to advocate for the resources necessary to engage in this work. So it's important for our teachers to be aware that, you know, of that reality. And, you know, they're going to be also asked to do things like, you know, English language learners, like being able to screen out is the, you know, child's performance as a result of not understanding the language or truly the disability. And many of our districts who are not used to doing that on a regular basis, they do struggle. And so our new teachers need to be aware that that is part of even determining eligibility. You got to rule that out. And technology, as we've been stating, is a key to engage in all of these things to ensure that we're not only compliant with the law, but we are, you know, providing meaningful access to all the key people involved.
That's great. Thank you so much. This is really helpful information. Just a quick note, when I was in the classroom, one of the things I saw is that as opposed to students who are second language learners being overrepresented in special ed, they were underrepresented because of being put in English language services and then not having access to special education services. So it really is, it's amazing how that happens. But so we're going to move on to the next question. Annie, I'm going to direct this one to you to start us off, please. As schools shift to supporting students with disabilities in inclusive settings, how can educators use technology to help reduce barriers?
I'm going to try really hard not to get on my soapbox, but let's talk first a little bit about, you know, inclusion. And you know, I'm from Washington State. That's where I work. And so statewide, we've been focused on, you know, increasing inclusive practices. increasing inclusion for our students with disabilities. And so I need to ground my answer in the equity and social justice parts of this, of inclusion as a whole, right? You know, when we are inclusion is asking really for the general education environment to become more malleable in order to include all students, right? That's like what we're really looking at. And this idea that a student with disability needs to earn their way into a general education, you know, environment is a belief system that we really need to kind of change. So all of this gets grounded in some real, you know, beliefs, and kind of we need to look at growth mindset and really look at how are we, you know, changing and adapting these beliefs, right? We all know that the foundations of education for kids with disabilities were exclusionary, right? And it's all kind of formed on a deficit-based system. So we've got to fix the environment, not the kid, right? We need to make that shift. And so I just want to ground us there. And so then, like, thinking about technology, the immediate thing, and I have my CAST colleagues here that are going to be way better experts, but to me, it's universal design for learning as a tier 1 of MTSS, right? Like that's right. So we need our districts to really be looking at implementing MTSS with fidelity, and universal design for learning becoming that tier 1 piece, right? For all professional development included, all of those things, right? So to me, that's, you know, again, the base. I realize I'm talking with my hands a lot today. So the next thing is really accepting and encouraging students as experts, you know, really looking at a strength-based, asset-based system. It is okay for me as the teacher to not know it all, right? And it really, when you're looking at incorporating technology into a classroom, every classroom, it allows students to really look at those 21st century skills, right? It allows students and their peers to make relevance out of content, right? Like to, you know, really problem solve, to think about the metacognition pieces of how are we kind of making changes and learning what we're learning, like how is that all working? I would recommend, and Maggie kind of touched on this earlier, but if you're going into a district and you're new, you know, I would be thinking about asking or finding out, or even having an idea of your own of what are kind of the base tools. Like, what do you think every classroom should have, right? And it's a great question to ask in your, you know, process of hiring. But, you know, to me, there's the speech to text, text to speech, right? There's electronic or digital access to texts and books, and there are some foundational things in terms of technology that I think that every classroom should have. And so thinking about those and identifying those, and one of the things that I think about that's been that I've been thinking a lot about lately is, you know, when you think about instructional models and you think about gradual release, right? The I do, we do, you do, right? One of the things that I think that we have missed, or sometimes maybe don't pay enough attention to, is, you know, I as the teacher, yeah, I do, right? Like then we do it all together, but there's students doing it with each other. And that's like another we do, right? It's like part B of we do. And I think what an amazing place where we can utilize technology. I think about students being able to collaborate using, you know, whiteboards and Jamboards and Padlet, and right, like these, you know, again, tools are right, like dependent, but there's so many ways that students can be working with each other that really immediately is going to kind of increase their learning and their ownership over their own learning, right? I think one of the things that I tell new teachers is, like, you can't do it all. You can't possibly do it all, right? So how are you really utilizing and structuring the environment so that students can rely on each other, right? There can be that collaborative piece, and then it cements all of those kind of learning outcomes. Some of the other things I think about curriculum modification, right? Like that's, using technology tools for curriculum modification, high leverage practices for special ed, right? Like that, those pieces. And I know Jackie mentioned earlier, accommodations, right? So looking at utilizing technology in a classroom for those pieces. I two more things I want to add, and one of those is really understanding the special ed process around, specifically assistive technology considerations, right? So really knowing what is that process in the IEP and the evaluation. I think that's really critical when we talk about inclusive settings, knowing that and being able to advocate for your students for that. And then the last thing I think is just the accessibility piece, right? That again, technology can support within the classroom, right? And then we have those concentric circles. So just making sure that everything is accessible, and that's just the automatic, right? That's just what we do. I will step off my soapbox now.
Oh, I'm just thanks for highlighting the accommodations and modifications piece, particularly as it relates to technological tools that our students with disabilities are using, in response to the how and the what for accessing the gen ed curriculum. And I guess some words of wisdom here is that how do we prepare our new teachers or those new to the field to work with other faculty and staff who may be resistant, reluctant adopters, or not truly getting that device is about access and equity and opportunity for that student. The new teacher may not be prepared. Of course they're going to adopt. It's in the accommodations and modifications. Everybody has to do it. My job isn't to ensure it, but going back to effective communication and collaboration, that's something that they may not be anticipating, and some type of role-playing scenario, what to do in that situation would be very helpful. Because that is also, I think that has been a point of discouragement for some of the new educators that I've worked with over time. So just putting that out there. Tara.
No, that's great. I was just going to see if you or Maggie wanted to add anything to that question.
Well, Annie was on all of my same soapboxes, and so she did a great job. And I think it kind of spills over into maybe our next question. So we can head that way if we want.
That sounds great. So Maggie, I'll have you start us off with this next question. So let's talk a little bit more about assistive technology. What should special educators know when selecting technology to use with their students? And how could some of these technologies benefit students without disabilities?
Yes, and yes. I'm gonna flip those questions. What should we know about supporting students without disabilities? And I say that because going back to what you said, Annie, about multi-tiered systems of support, those that problem-solving process that is a multi-tiered system of support is put in place specifically to support a robust universal level of instruction, provide supports for students who need some additional support, and then really individualized supports for even fewer kids. And so I think if we think about the provision of assistive technology like tools, I might call them accessibility features, at that universal level of support, we can really start to think about, or within a multi-tiered system, we can really start to think about how we can support all kids using technology to support their learning and remove those barriers. I do have a hesitation about calling all of these tools assistive technology, and I'll come back to that in just a minute. But I think when we start thinking within that tiered system, and it aligns directly to our assessment system, many states, if not all states at this point, have an accessibility framework within their assessment system, talking big assessment, statewide assessment, where we look at universal supports where students have access to certain tools. Might be a highlighter, it might be support with a calculator for math, all of these they're considered universal supports. And then the next layer up would be, I think a lot of systems refer to them as designated supports that are turned on for some kids. Some kids are getting access to these based on decision-making that an educator has worked through regarding their need. And then there are accommodations. That's the tippity top. Those are individualized decisions for students with disabilities or on 504 plans, or English learners in some cases. And so I think when we're framing that, not from our assessment perspective, but more from our instructional perspective, and thinking within our systems in our buildings, we can really start to tease out, like Annie said, what are those universal supports that we're providing to everybody? And I have to say this, that we can tie these back to, because people, Jackie, as you had mentioned, got some theoretical differences, some understanding that are different between new educators at times, maybe they're veteran educators, and some other folks who have been in the building. So new educators might come in, or other educators may be coming from a different building saying, hey, these tools are awesome. I'm going to give them to everybody and we're all going to be successful and it's going to, feel great. Well, other teachers, the common phrase that I hear is that's cheating. And so to me, in my roles that I've gotten to play, I've had the ability to go in and look at the standards and look and see if these tools that we're providing are truly supporting the standards or if they're conflicting with the construct. And in many cases, these tools that we're providing at universal level and designated supports, even those accommodations are completely supportive of the standards that have been put into place. And so to get that cheating, it's not cheating. We're just using the technology at our fingertips. So that's how we can really start to, within a system, frame supporting all students who might need some of these accessibility features to support their learning. But then let's hop over into assistive technology. What do special education teachers need to know about assistive technology? And Jackie did a great job earlier of talking. It's a requirement to consider assistive technology at every single IEP meeting. And the consideration is not, does the kid need assistive technology? Nope, we considered it. No, this should be a robust conversation that includes and starts with the student, and getting feedback from the student, involves the parents or the caregivers, the families, and really focuses on every aspect of learner's environment throughout their day. From there, if there are, and I would suggest that if we're supporting a student on an IEP or a 504 plan within a district, there is something within their environment that is not supportive, that needs a barrier that needs to be removed. And oftentimes assistive technology directly within that environment can help reduce that barrier. So I would say, and I'm not the federal government, but I would say majority of our students on IEPs in some way, shape, or form, whether it's time management software, timers, maybe a Pomodoro timer, whether it's some sort of journaling support software that's needed, or check-in, check-out system, or even reading and writing supports, right? Those are the easy ones. Math, whatever it is, many students, a good majority of our students should be receiving assistive technology. And I would probably say are at some point in their day receiving assistive technology. So if we're not checking that box, we need to go back to the consideration process in that conversation. So that comes to the next thing that I wanted to say, and the mindset of our educators coming into our system. It's great that we have these tools and we're going to use them. The other thing that we need to really be thoughtful of is having the idea that I am not an interventionist. I am a learning designer, right? I'm going to design learning opportunities and collaborate with folks in my environment that the student needs me to collaborate with to remove those barriers. And part of that learning designer kind of mindset is that we need to be thinking through each part of our students' days, instead of just thinking of ourselves as maybe interventionists or homework help, or I do this X, Y, and Z. Does that make sense? So then thinking about the technology specifically, this is where, Jackie, I really appreciate you sharing this earlier. Those services boxes within the assistive technology services, leverage those boxes. Assistive tech, no educator, veteran or new, is going to come into a classroom and know how to implement every type of assistive technology out there, because the breadth and depth of assistive technology is so broad and deep. And so writing in, understanding, okay, here I am in my skills and I need to be here. What are the action steps? What are the training? What are the supports that I need to get my skills there to best support the student? What are the parents' trainings and supports that they need to get there? And any other paraprofessional, direct service providers. It's really thinking broadly about having that growth mindset. Here's where we are now. We need to get here for the student. What do we need to get there? Because nobody, and just the understanding, nobody is going to come in with the knowledge and the skills to just operate all assistive technologies right off the bat. So that consideration process, the evaluation process is really key. But then also last thing is just know who to go to for help, whether it's an assistive technology consultant. Maybe you even just start with your tech coach in your building or your district. Maybe you go to your special education coach, but just know who to go to if you need help with anything in that process. Those are powerful places to start.
Great, thanks so much, Maggie. And Jackie, I had a little bit of a sub question for you. And I know Maggie already touched on this a little bit, but what are some things or specifics that special educators should know about including assistive technology in the IEP?
Awesome, including AT in the IEP. I certainly hope that folks highlight that moment, that opportunity, in their IEP writing courses, in their instructional design courses. But essentially, new teachers should look into what their district has in the way of like guidelines for documenting AT needs in the IEP. What their State Department of Education might have in the way of AT guidelines, just so that they're familiar about how to effectively document those assistive technology needs and devices and services as part of specially designed instruction, related services and supplementary aids and services, so on and so forth. Just a few points, and actually, I wearing my state hat, when I go in and I do examinations, of AT, was it considered, and we are looking deeper than just that. And so, I would want teachers aware that like all services that the IEP team determines are needed to support the selection, acquisition, and use of AT devices are designated in the IEP. So, the provision of the services is critical to the effective use of the devices, right? So, like, how is that written? How is that written as clearly as possible in that IEP? It's important that the IEP document describes the assistive technologies services that are needed. And when I mean by services, let me be clear on that. I mean, such services may include evaluation, customization or maintenance of devices, coordination of services, and yes, thank you, like everybody, yes, training for the student and family and professionals, among others. Super key. We want to make sure that the IEP illustrates that AT is a tool to support achievement of goals and progress in gen ed curriculum by establishing a clear relationship between the student needs and the AT devices and services and the student's goals and objectives. So we want to make sure that IEP content regarding AT use is written in a language that describes how AT contributes to the achievement of measurable and observable outcomes, like real important, content which, describes these measurable and observable outcomes for AT use. It enables the IEP team to review the student's progress and determine whether the AT has had the expected impact on student participation and achievement. AT is included in the IEP and in a manner that provides a clear and complete description of the devices and services to be provided and used to address student needs and achieve expected results. So in your IEP writing, what do I mean by that? It's written so that participants in the meeting and others who use that information to implement the student's program is what the technology is to be available, how it is to be used, and under what circumstances jargon at any cost, no matter what, should be avoided in doing this. And, finally, I'll just say, like, some of the most common errors that I see around this is that IEP teams don't know how to include AT in IEPs. Like you're saying, right? Checkbox, yes or no, and like none of that, like supporting information or that alignment that I just described. Concerns and needs. Let's see if the AT is in there. How does it fit? And how does it align with the goals? There should be think about a horizontal line going across that IEP. It should all make sense. It should all be lined up. Another one, IEPs including AT use as a formula approach to documentation. All IEPs are developed in a similar fashion, and the unique needs of the child is not addressed, as part of that AT. AT is included in the IEP, but the relationship to goals and objectives is unclear. As I just said, just a couple more of my top 10 here. The AT devices are included in the IEP, but no AT services support the use. And then finally, AT expected results are not measurable or observable. So I think that given what I suggested that teachers be aware of and have the opportunity to practice before and getting into the district, and if they don't, of course, reaching out to their mentor, reaching out to their coach, whoever's supporting them in the first 2 years, and getting some guidance from them about how to do this. But that's also finally, as they're practicing those IEP writing, those goals and objectives, giving them the opportunity to think about AT. And certainly there's no clear-cut criterion for where AT devices and services should be documented in the IEP, like nationally across the state, but telling them to expect that and have them practice writing it and where to include it where it's most appropriate.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
One more thing that's really important, Jackie, when you talk about documentation, one of the critical points when we're talking about these inclusive technologies or having these accessibility features available as a universal support, we often hear the phrase, well, we give that to everybody, so it's not assistive technology. So backing up to that concept of if it's needed, if it's required by a student to access the general curriculum, it is assistive technology, even though every other student has access to it. So just making sure we're documenting as such on the IEP. In these inclusive technology systems, it's great to have those tools available for everyone. We just, as special educator leaders, as special education leaders, we just need to make sure that we're clear about how we document those things appropriately.
That's great, Maggie. One thing we sometimes say, and I've heard you guys say too, is what's the must-have versus the nice-to-have. So for some kids, it's nice to have it. For some kids, it's a must-have and should be on the IEP, even though it's available. And we're running out of time, but there was one more thing I wanted to bring up before we close today. Maggie, when we spoke the other day, you mentioned something about the need to give people permission. And I really wanted you to tell us a little bit more about this and how special educators can be better prepared to be successful in the classroom using that.
Well, the concept of permission is kind of a safety thing, right? But my mom was an educator for 40 years. And as I talked to her about what I do for my entire career, she's always like, wow, that's a huge shift from where we've been. Wow. And finally she said to me, Maggie, sometimes if you're feeling stuck with educators, one thing you might try is just give them permission. This is different than what they were taught, what many of us were taught. And so give them permission to try these things and that it's okay. And so when we think about our new educators, permission, number one, just to try new things, but also permission just to, these are new things, but there are going to be folks that they come into contact with And so just giving permission to talk about these concepts and these things in a way that maybe honors where our system has been, but looks forward to the future and how these things can really be leveraged. So permission is just permission wherever you are to move this needle forward in the realm of inclusive technology practices.
Great. Thanks so much, Maggie. Annie or Jackie, did you want to add anything?
I think that is a perfect note to end on, and it applies way beyond assistive technology and what we're talking about today. We need to give our educators permission to take risks, to fail, to, to be vulnerable, all of those pieces. So thank you, Maggie, for that.
That's great. Thanks to all of you. What a great note to end on. I thought this was a fantastic discussion. I learned so much. And I hope we'll get to talk more again. Thanks.